All right, welcome everyone. I'm so thankful that you decided to join us today. I appreciate you spending some of your workday coming to learn about this really important topic. We have a very meaty presentation. There's a lot of information here that I'm going to attempt to share with you in a 2-hour time frame, okay? It sounds long, but it's a lot of stuff. So hopefully, I'm hoping we can get through all of it. Quickly, most of you know me, but I just wanted to introduce myself and give you the opportunity to connect with me on LinkedIn by scanning this QR code that I was standing in front of. So sorry about that. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, I'd love to connect with you. I also post a lot of updates on LinkedIn, immigration law related. So I would love for you to connect with me. I started Nero Immigration Law 17 years ago yesterday. Yesterday was our law firm's 17-year anniversary. So that was a big milestone for our firm. So this is our one way of celebrating, because we did not have a party this year. I did a party on 10 years and 15 years. And if we get to 20, maybe I'll do a 20-year party. But 17, we just said thank you on social media. Now I'm thanking some of you in person. But I've been practicing for over 22 years now, and I've only focused on immigration law my whole practice. During the first Trump administration, I started working a bit more on this kind of side part of my law practice, which is employer immigration compliance, as opposed to just helping people apply for visas and green cards and citizenship, which we do all day, every day. It's our bread and butter of our firm. We started also working with companies on their compliance because during the first Trump administration, they started to do a lot more enforcement on employers, and that died down a lot during COVID and during the Biden administration. And now it's back with a vengeance, okay? So you are in the right place today to protect your businesses. A little bit more about me, just quickly. We help clients all over the world in English and Spanish. I was lucky enough to learn Spanish by living in Spain. So that was awesome, and thank goodness, because it helps me a lot in my practice. My team is also fully bilingual. And I do a lot of advocacy work for the Alopecia Foundation. You have information about it in your packet. If you like this presentation today, I hope that you'll consider making a small donation. I think you're going to get a lot of value and a free lunch. So hopefully you'll decide that you liked it enough to give the foundation a little donation. And that's the card in there with the picture of me with no hair, which is what I really look like. This is a wig. April is demonstrating for me. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so quickly, what I would love for you to do, and I'm sorry for those of you on Zoom, because you might not be able to participate in this next minute, but I would love for you to take out your business card, please. I would love you to write, my sales coach taught me this, so he said I have to do it in every presentation that I give, so I always try to remember to do it. On your card, you can write MRSQ. Hold on to your card. If during the presentation you think you might want to have a meeting with me, have a referral for me, have a potential speaking engagement for me, which I would love, because this is what I love to do. I would just do speaking engagements all day, every day if I could. Unfortunately, I can't do that, but someday maybe. Or if you have a question for me, you can circle that, and then I'm going to take your business cards, and I'm going to pick one or two, and I have some fun little goodies, passport covers, and little pads that have like a magnet on them. Whatever. It's just a fun gimmick and a fun way for me to get your business card, but also to know if you have a question or some other, thing that you want to connect on specifically with me. Okay. All right. So today we're going to delve into two areas that companies face when it comes to immigration compliance. Now, the two areas break down into a lot more like sub areas, but the the two kind of big buckets that we're going to focus on is visits from Immigration and Customs Enforcement to your business, but perhaps for something like a raid, or what they're really called is just a worksite enforcement action, but colloquially we say raid, or a notice of inspection leading to an I-9 audit. Okay, so those are kind of like the two types of visits that you might get from ICE, and they're very different. And so we're going to talk about both of them in a lot of detail. So first off, we're going to, just because I don't know the mix of the audience and your experience with this stuff, I'm going to give you, some of the basics. In your packets, and for those of you that are watching the webinar, you should have received like a electronic copy of the packet that you all have in front of you. You'd actually have one of the Form I-9s. So if you want to look at it while we're talking about this stuff, feel free. But this is a form that all employers must give to their employees when they start, right? So part of your onboarding process when you have a new person joining your company, regardless of the person's nationality, that's irrelevant in this conversation, okay? The employer has the obligation to give this form to everyone and have them fill it out within the first 3 days of work for pay. What the purpose of the form is twofold. It's to confirm a person's identity, number one, and number two is to confirm that the person is authorized to work in the United States of America. Okay, that is the kind of twofold purpose. You need to do it within 3 business days of the person starting work for pay. So what does that mean? Depends on what your company is, right? Because not every company is going to count their business days the same way, right? A hospital is probably going to have every single day be a business day because it's always open. Whereas like my law firm, it's going to be Monday through Friday, because if I made my employees work on Saturday and Sunday, I would probably have a revolution at my firm. And so, I would count Monday through Friday only as business days. So the way to count the days depends on the type of business you have. But if it's a day that the business is open and operational, then it counts, okay? So don't just assume business day means Monday through Friday, because that's not what it means. Okay, so the other kind of basic rule here is, number one, you have to do the I-9. And number two, once you as an employer know that you have someone that is unauthorized to work, you're not, sorry, there's a lot of noise out there, so we're going to shut that. You cannot keep employing that person, okay? Those are like the two general rules. To boil it down really easy, right? You need to do the form. You have to do it within 3 days. We'll get into that in a lot more detail in a minute. But the other thing is, like, once you have noticed that this person is not authorized to work, you are no longer able to keep them employed unless you want to break the law. So I'm not saying you have to fire them, but you need to understand that if you keep employing this person, you're likely in violation of the law, and therefore you can get in trouble for it. A lot of businesses take that calculated risk because they decide that they would rather employ someone knowing that they're not authorized to work and deal with the consequences than let that person go. And that's a big kind of conflict that we have happening right now on an everyday level in businesses all across the country. Okay, so why should you care about this stuff? I get this comment a lot. All my employees are US citizens, so I don't need to worry about this stuff. And I'm like, I mean, that's false, like on a number of levels, but it's completely false because you still have the obligation, and you still have the obligation to do it the right way and maintain those records in a certain way, and not do certain things that can open you up to other things like discrimination claims and stuff like that. So the fact that you're just assuming that because all your people are working for you are US citizens, you don't need to worry about this stuff is just completely false. You can still get audited, you can still get fined and penalized. Now, if it's true that all your people are US citizens or maybe green card holders or what have you, maybe you won't get some of the worst fines, right? Which is like knowingly employing unauthorized workers, right? Undocumented immigrants, things like that. But you still could get pretty hefty fines. So hefty enough that you don't want to play around with this stuff. The other thing is to assume that because you're not in one of the like typical industries that get targeted, for example, construction, hospitality are two big ones, right? That are constantly targeted for this stuff. Staffing and companies are another type of industry that is typically targeted. But just to assume like, oh, I'm not in a at-risk industry for this stuff, so I'm all good. That's out the window, especially now. This administration has basically said that it's not if you're going to get audited, it's when. They have a lot of funding now also through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. They got like even more funding than they already had. Now, there's a lot of debates happening right now in Congress about funding, and so we'll see how that all plays out. But, you should not assume that because you're not in a targeted industry that you're not going to have an issue. Here are some of the government agencies that are involved in this stuff. You have USCIS. USCIS is typically the benefits arm of immigration, but in the context of this stuff that we're talking about today, USCIS promulgates the form, right? So if you look at your form, you'll see up in the corner that it says USCIS Form I-9. And that's because USCIS promulgated the form, but they don't actually enforce the form. ICE is the one that enforces what you're actually doing on the form and how you're maintaining the form and, are you doing it the right way, et cetera, et cetera. So if you get audited, it's not USCIS that's going to audit you or visit your business with a notice of inspections. It's going to be ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They are the ones that have been like in the news, like all over the news lately. So that's that same agency. And as you could imagine from what you might be seeing playing out on your television screens, you don't want to mess with ICE if you can avoid it. And then also the employee rights section, the immigrant and employee rights section, sorry, IER, is also part of this as well. In a way, if you start getting into areas of immigration-related discrimination, which we'll also touch on today. Okay, so this stuff actually became a requirement under the Immigration Reform and Control Act in 1986. So basically anyone that came into your company after 1986 is required to have the I-9. So you might have some people that came into your company before 1986, but the chances of that are probably pretty low the further that we get away from 1986. Karen here probably wasn't even born in 1986. No, she's like, hell no, I was. She's like, I was not even a glimmer in the eye of anyone in 1986, right? And now she's like running the marketing at this amazing law firm. So, the chances of pre-1986 people is decreasing quite significantly. So you're better off to just assume that like everybody needs an I-9. Okay, so we already talked about the rest of that, so I'm going to skip forward. You might see me skipping around, but that's because some of this is potentially repetitive, so I might be skipping around a bit. That is wrong. That's not the most recent edition. I obviously did not update that slide. The one you have in your packet is the most recent edition. You always want to make sure that you're using the most recent edition. This one is dated 1/20/2025, so I need to fix that on the presentation. Andrea, if you're listening, please make a note of this slide so I can fix the date there. Also, there's a Spanish version that you can give to employees that need help understanding what the form says, but they can't actually fill out the Spanish version and use the Spanish version unless they're in Puerto Rico. Okay, so you can provide it as like a reference point for people whose English is maybe not the best and they would like to compare the Spanish version to the English version, but make sure that the English version is the one that's being actually executed. Okay, that's very important. This link, which I can like send it to you guys in an electronic format so you can click on it if you're interested, but this is a very, very valuable link. This is your employer handbook. It's on I-9 Central, which is part of the USCIS website that has like a lot of information about I-9. They call it I-9 Central. It's just a sub page of the USCIS webpage. But this handbook lives there. I would have printed it out and given it to you, but it's like very long, right? It's a very detailed handbook, and it goes through a lot of if this, then that, like rules for when you're filling one of these out. It also has samples of like what a document should look like what should a green card actually look like, and what are like past versions. You can see like, okay, maybe this person doesn't have the newest version, but it doesn't mean it's not valid, right? So when you're inspecting someone's documents, like it's a good idea to have an idea of like what it ought to look like, because a lot of times it's an older document and you don't want to just assume that it's not a valid document. Okay, so this handbook is a great tool for you guys to use. I always mention this scam alert. You're never going to get a request over email for your I-9s. So it's kind of like the IRS is never going to call you and demand XYZ. That's usually a scam. It's the same. So if you get an email requesting your I-9s and it's like the first contact that you're getting, that's likely a scam. If you've already been visited by ICE and then there's like follow-up by email, okay, that's different. But I'm talking about like first contact, right? Like where you're finding out that you're getting audited over an email. That's not going to happen. Okay. Okay, something to keep in mind is that only employees can complete section 1. Okay, so that is what the employees are gonna complete. So if you're looking at the form, section 1 is what you have your employees complete, and then section 2 is what the employer completes. You would be shocked how many times that gets messed up. Something as simple as that. Okay, so now the form is even more condensed. When they redid the form and redesigned it, they condensed sections 1 and 2 onto one page. So now it's even more likely that people are going to mess it up. And like even people that I've onboarded in my law firm where like we teach this form are still messing it up. So you as the employer, it is your responsibility to make sure that the employee is filling out section 1 correctly and completely, but that also they're not like going into section 2 and starting to write things in section 2. Okay, so that happens a lot. It sounds like silly, but it's like a very easy way to have mistakes, and mistakes that you can actually get penalized on because it's improper. So you can actually get like a fine if that happens. Only the authorized representative of the employer or the employer can fill section 2. And then now you have re-verification and rehire supplements. It says section 3 here. That was from the old form. Now there are actually additional supplements that are on pages in the back. And there's spots for re-verification, and also for if you have a translator helping, there's also a spot that the translator needs to sign. So all of that needs to be properly filled out. Now, for remote employees, there's a couple of options, but what you need to understand for remote employees is that you are expected to either have someone in the location of the remote employee physically inspecting their document and signing off on the I-9 form, or you have to be eligible to use the electronic verification procedures. And if you're not eligible to use that, but you use it, then you're doing it improperly and you can get penalized for that. So we're going to talk about how you qualify for the remote inspection. And that's basically when you're getting the documents transmitted to you electronically, and then you're doing like a video chat with the person, because maybe they're in another state or they're work from home or whatever. And so they're not coming in to physically give you the documents in your hand. If that's the case, then you have to actually qualify to use that procedure. And if you're not a qualified employer, you can't do it. And then that's when you need to get like the person. A lot of times it's a notary or somebody, someone else that's trusted in the location of the employee. What I recommend though is if you are going to use this like remote person to help you, don't use someone who is like a friend or family member of the employee. Okay, you want to have someone that's representing you as the employer. Okay, not that is the person that's like the mom or the boyfriend of the employee. Because do you want that person signing off on the employer attestation? I don't think so, right? And what I really recommend is if you're going to go down this road with remote hires is that you find someone that is trusted to your company, and then you, I went like that. I was scared I'd turn the microphone off. That you have them sign something, like an agreement between you and them, that they're representing you in this way, they understand the liability aspect of it, whatever, and you have them signing off, like just separately from anything that they're doing on the employee's actual form. Okay, because they're like basically an extension of you in that moment, you being the employer. Okay, so come over here. Once you have the employee fill out section 1, then you are going to present them, and I'm sorry I keep stealing yours, but you're in the seat of honor right here where you're close enough to me that I can grab your stuff. The second page is this thing that we call the load, the list of acceptable documents. This is what you're supposed to give the employee and have them decide what they want to present to you to be verified. You are not, as the employer, to say, bring me your passport when you come back tomorrow. Bring me your driver's license and your social. Bring me your green card, et cetera, et cetera. That is actually discriminatory document abuse, and you're strictly prohibited by law to do that. So what do you do then? You give them this and you say, pick. It's your choice. Now pick, okay, this looks a little confusing. So you can explain to them what you mean by that. It's either one document from list A or a combination of 1B and 1C. So it's not an A, a B, and a C. Okay, it's not a C and an A. It's either A, period, or a combination of B and C. And you need one of each, 1B and 1C. Okay, and why is that? If you look at this, and it explains it here, list A are documents that verify both things at once. What's your identity, and are you authorized to work in the United States? And that document does both things, so you only need to present one document because it serves both purposes. B and C only serve one purpose, either identity or proving you're authorized to work. So that's why you need one of each. Okay? You don't want to require like combinations that aren't that, because that also can get you into trouble. There's so many ways to get into trouble with this stuff, which is why I think you all are doing yourselves a great favor by being here. Because even just opening your eyes to the world of like the landmines that exist with this stuff is like step 1, right? So even if you walk away from this today and you're like, what? Like I have to learn so much more about that. I need to, review all of that again. Maybe you want to talk to me one-on-one. At least you're waking up to the fact that this is kind of a landmine situation, that there's like lots of ways that you can screw it up. As you're accepting these documents, the combination that they're going to choose and give you to look at, you have to make sure it's unexpired in the moment they give it to you, right? So that doesn't mean that if it expires in the future, you need to worry about it. And in some cases you do, and in some cases you don't. But in the moment they give it to you, it has to be unexpired. Okay? There are a few exceptions to that. For example, an employment authorization document that has an expiration date, but also the person is eligible for like an auto extension or something like that. So there are a few caveats to that where the actual document might be expired, but then they have like this kind of addendum thing that goes with it that makes it not expired, right? So, but that's like a rare circumstance. If you're taking a passport, if you're taking a green card, if you're taking a driver's license in combo with usually a social, that's the typical combo with a driver's license, you have to make sure that it's unexpired in the moment that they give it to you, okay? If the document is a document that proves that the person is authorized to work and it expires, that one needs to be what we call re-verified. But if it's like a List A document, you usually don't re-verify green cards and passports. So the green card and the passport need to be valid when they give it to you, but if it expires in the future, you don't need to re-verify it. Okay, so again, that's like super confusing. And I remember when I started doing all of this stuff, I was like, well, what about the green cards that are only good for 2 years? And then you have to do the whole like process to lift the conditions and blah, blah, blah. Like, I think we have to re-verify them. You don't need to re-verify those. And that to me, like, doesn't make any sense. As like my lawyer brain, that makes no sense. But that's the rule, right? So just knowing how this stuff works in terms of the rules is important. Okay, so here's your example of the list of acceptable documents. You also have it in front of you. When they revamped the form a couple years ago, they added this acceptable receipt section. So if you're actually using that, you need to like be aware of this section. If you're not using that, then you can ignore it. Something I like to point out is that if you're accepting a social, make sure it's what we call an unrestricted social. And what does that mean? That means that it doesn't have the words on it, valid only with DHS authorization, or not valid for employment, or valid for work only with INS authorization. INS doesn't exist anymore, but the card might say that because it might be an old version. If it says one of those things on it, you can't accept it as a List C document, okay? Doesn't mean it's not a valid social security number. It just means that that on its own is not a valid combination with a List B document, okay? And it says it right there. So if you get confused, just read what it says. Okay, so this is basically like what it's going to look like. You're going to have an employment offer and acceptance. You're going to give the employee the I-9. They're going to complete Section 1 no later than the first day of work for pay. So you can have them do it before, right? Once they accept the offer, you can have them fill out Section 1 before, but you want them to do it at least on the first day, okay? And then they basically have till the end of the 3rd business day to present their documents to you, have you review them, and then you as the employer fill out Section 2, okay? Unless you're using a remote person, then they're gonna do that for you, okay? Make sure you're completing all the fields. If you have the translator or any of those people assisting, then you're gonna have them filling out one of the supplements, which says it right here, right? So if you have the preparer, you want them to also fill out the section, or the translator. Okay, that's the same thing I just said. We already talked about this, so I'll speed through this, but basically this is like that you shouldn't be telling people what to bring, that you have to give them the list and let them choose. What you want to be aware of is something that I call the wallet dump, which is like they dump out their whole purse and their whole life in front of you, and then they're like, here, just pick what you want. And then if you start selecting, that's the same thing as telling them exactly what to bring. This stuff sounds stupid, but actually it is one of the flags that they use in the government to figure out if you're doing document abuse or not, and then finding you and getting you in trouble on that. So what does that mean? That means, for example, if you have an inordinate amount of this, like basically every citizen that works for you presented a passport and there's no other combinations, then that sets off a flag that the employer is actually telling the people what to bring. okay? Because they actually look at like what percentage of your people presented this exact document instead of some alternate combination. And then that will set off a flag that maybe, and you know, maybe you're not, maybe it was just a coincidence, but you better believe that they're going to do like depositions and interviews of your employees and be like, did they ever tell you that they wanted you to bring your passport or your green card? Is that the way they worded it? How did they ask you? Did they give you this list? You know, so it can start to get that hairy if it's really bad. So just avoid that altogether by not doing it. If the employee is insistent that they want you to tell them what to bring, you just reiterate that that's not the way this works. You know, they have to select. You can go through this with them and explain what the stuff is. Like if they don't understand what they're reading, like it's okay to facilitate their understanding. But at the end of the day, you just need to make sure that they are the ones that are selecting the documents, okay? And then you are actually supposed to like hold the document in your hand unless you qualify for the electronic procedure, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Hold it in your hand and inspect it. Now, you know, you're not a forensic, you know, inspector or whatever those people are called, fraud inspector or whatever. So like, unless that's your job, like, you know, use your best judgment, refer to that handbook, that M724 handbook that I told you is a great resource. It gives you samples of what it should look like, things like that, but use your best judgment. Also, like, compare it to the person. Like, is that them? It might be a real driver's license, but maybe it's like not the person that's sitting in front of you. Okay, because that's another trick that people try, right? Oh, I'm going to use my, you know, brother-in-law's driver's license and his social security card because he's legal and I'm not, right? And then the next thing you know, you've got like Jose sitting in front of you, but you have like Juan's documents and it's not the same person. I mean, I'm not going to lie. This recording hopefully won't make it to anywhere where I get in trouble for saying this, but I used to, as a kid, pull that trick all the time because my sister was 3 years older than me and we used to look exactly alike. We don't anymore, you know, because now she has a full head of hair and, you know, I got a different wig on every day. So yeah, now we don't pass as the same. But back in the day, we looked almost identical, even though she was 3 years older than me. So I used to use her driver's license anytime I wanted to buy anything that I was not old enough to buy, but you can use your imagination what that was, you know, and it worked like a charm because it was a real driver's license. It wasn't a fake ID. It was a real license with the holograms and all the crap, right? So, but it wasn't me. So that's like the other thing you need to be focused on, not just like, is this a fake document, but does this document relate to the person that it's supposed to be for, right? Okay. One thing on that slide that I didn't talk about that I think is important to just mention is that in the context of I-9, more is not better. So you don't want to be like, oh, just bring me, you know, one of everything on there that you have, like, and I'm just going to photocopy it all and put it in your file. No, that's also a violation. Lots of violations to deal with. So you just want to have like the thing that you're required to have. You don't want to have like other extraneous things, okay, or more than what you're required to have. You know, the passport and the driver's license and the social security card. No, you don't need all of that. You either need just the passport or just the social and the driver's license. If you need the driver's license for something else, like maybe it's a commercial driver's license and you need to have a copy, that's fine. Take the copy of the driver's license. Just don't store it with the I-9 file. It should go in a different file. Okay, never combine your I-9s with your personnel file. Those should be separate. In the event of an audit, you don't want to have to, you know, uncode that cluster disaster, right? Where it's like everything is jammed in one folder and then you have to pull out the stuff that you need. So keep it separate. Keep the I-9 and whatever document they presented, the copy of it, if you're going to do copies, which we'll talk about that in a second, separate from the personnel file that has like all the other stuff. And that's where you can put copies of like the driver's license if you need it for something else and not related to the I-9. Okay, so since I mentioned it, let's talk about copies. Do you keep copies of the documents? it's up to you. You're not required to keep copies unless you're using E-Verify. So we'll talk about that separately. But if you're just in the context of I-9, you're not required to keep copies of the documents. Now, I think that's a bad idea. As a lawyer who practices in this area and who has helped employers through audits, and I say keep copies, because if it comes to the fact that you're getting audited and you're trying to argue your way out of a penalty, you need to have like the evidence to support what you did here, right? And so if you don't have copies, that could be impossible, right? Especially if those people are long gone and don't even work for you anymore. And by the way, you can still get fined on their form, even if they don't work for you anymore. So keep the copies, in my opinion, okay? I think it's better. Yeah. Yeah, of course.
The point that I'm not keeping copies is,
I mean, I don't think there is a point, but a lot of people don't because it's not required under the law that they keep copies.
so then you just run the risk of potentially being, if you're audited, then you have no documentation.
You don't have the backup. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I say keep, like, you know.
Like
Yeah.
Actually,
So April, for those of you on here, is asking, you know, why would someone not keep copies? I mean, it's not required, but it's a bad idea. So that's why you're here learning that you should keep copies. Okay. Now, there's a caveat. Keep copies for everyone or keep copies for nobody. The death knell of this stuff, and the thing that's going to really mess you up in terms of fines and penalties and even potentially lawsuits and other things, is doing things differently for different populations. Okay. Oh, I'm only going to keep the copies of the immigrants, but not of the US citizens. Okay, that's discrimination. You can't do that. Get sued for that. Okay, so all or nothing. You either keep copies for everybody or you keep copies for nobody. Okay, and just as a general rule for everything we're talking about, get into that mindset. Whatever policy you have, you need to apply it across the board and not kind of cherry pick who you're going to apply certain policies to. Okay, that's your best bet to stay safe with this stuff, is to just, whatever policy you have, it goes for everyone. Now, what if you leave here and you're like, well, I haven't been keeping copies, but I want to keep copies now. What do I do to fix that? Do I go back and get everyone's copies from before? I would say no. I would say you draw a line in the sand. This is the date that we're starting to keep copies, and everything that we do from now in advance of this date that we changed the policy, we do it this way. And if it's prior, you know, you're not going to go back and like retroactively start trying to fill in the gaps. Okay, that would be my recommendation. If you change what you've been doing, you know, do it as of the date that you make the change going forward, and then do it consistently from that date going forward. Yeah.
You want to document that date?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Great point. Great point. You definitely want to document the fact that as of blah, blah, blah date, we had the policy change. Now we do it this way. Yes, because that will be helpful when you're trying to explain, if you get to that point that you have to explain this stuff in an audit. Okay. All right. Let's speed it up a little bit because I'm a little nervous that we're going to run out of time.
How many audits go on?
So I have statistics later in the presentation, but in 2025, it went back up to almost the first Trump administration levels, which were like super high. Like they were on a tear in the first Trump administration until COVID. And then when COVID hit and then Biden administration, it went like way down. And then all my presentations were about like, here's the new changes, here's the COVID flexibilities, here's this, here's that. No one was getting audited, but it was just like new ways of doing things. And that's what we were mainly talking about. Now we're back up almost to the level. I saw the 2025 statistic. It was almost back up to the 2019 statistic. I don't have it off the top of my head. It's in one of these slides though, so we'll get to it at some point. Okay, so I already mentioned about when you re-verify. Basically, if the basis of the work authorization has changed or it's going to have a end date, that's when you re-verify. Otherwise, you're not going to re-verify the documents that you accepted on the day that you accepted them, even if they expire, right? So like just because someone's passport, US passport expires doesn't mean that you make them bring in the new one when they get it. Like you're good. When you saw it, it was not expired. You don't ever have to re-verify that person ever again. If they had an H-1B visa or they had a EAD, which is an employment authorization document or something like that, those you have to re-verify because those, the basis of the employment expires. Okay. All right. So how long do you have to keep this stuff? Right? Like you're filling it out, and then what do you do with it? Because that's the trap here that a lot of employers kind of get complacent. They fall into the complacency trap because you fill that out and then you put it in a file. Unless if you never get audited, it's just sitting there, right? And so a lot of people are like, whatever, like they don't care because they don't have to actually like turn it in. They don't have to submit it. You don't have to send it into an office by a certain date. There's no deadline to file it like with your taxes or anything like that. So employers get complacent because they're not having to actually do anything with this unless you get audited. That's the problem, right? So you still have to do it. You just have to basically retain it and retain it in a safe way, please, because this is the identity thief's dream, this paper. It's got everything you could ever, an identity thief could ever want to know. So you don't want to put your employees at risk like that by just having this stuff sitting out or, you know, in any old folder. You want to have it under lock and key or have it secured somewhere. If you're doing paper I-9s, you want to make sure it's locked up somewhere. We'll talk about electronic in a minute, but okay, so what do you do with it then? So here's the rule. It's the top one here. It has to be, I always read it because I feel like I'm messing it up. You have to keep it for the later of 3 years after the employee's hire date or 1 year after their termination date. Okay, once you get outside of that window, which will never happen if you don't terminate them, okay? So like all your current people should have an I-9. You're never gonna purge them if the person still works for you. Once they're terminated, that's when you start doing the weird calculation, which I have to read every time. The good news is the website, the I-9 Central website has a calculator where you can like enter the person's dates and it tells you purge or don't purge. So that's very useful. So if you're ever unsure how to do the math, just use the calculator on the website, okay? But this is also important because if you're outside of the retention period, you should purge the document. Because what happens is when they audit you, they end up taking more things than they should take, and they end up finding you on things that you weren't even required to be retaining. And if you don't have a good lawyer spotting that stuff, I spot that stuff. I'm like, why are you finding him on this? It's outside of the period. Like, remove that, right? But if you're not using a lawyer and you're just trying to figure this crap out on your own, you're going to end up paying fines on things that you shouldn't have even been fined on because they're outside of their retention period and they shouldn't have even been looking at that stuff. Okay, so keep a system where you're periodically purging the ones that can be purged. Okay, don't purge ones that aren't ripe to be purged yet. So you want to make sure you have a good system to keep track of that. Okay, so we already talked about most of this. Just making sure I'm not missing anything. That was all of it. This thing, I feel like it's not working. Okay, there we go. Okay, let's talk quickly about electronic I-9s. There's a lot of companies that sell, we're going to just do this for you, right? And I get this a lot. Oh, well, I have, you know, whatever company. I'm not gonna say ADP because ADP is here. Jordan, I see you. But let's say like an ADP or one of those companies, they might say, the employer might say to me, oh, I don't know. ADP handles that for me. And I'm just like, oh, when I hear that, I'm like, something dies inside of my body. Or, you know, I see dollar signs because I'm like, oh, this is going to be fun when they get in trouble. Like, this is going to be a hot mess. Because, again, I'm not trying to throw any company under the bus, but a lot of times the companies are not doing this in the proper way, number one. But number two, like at the end of the day, the government's not going after ADP because they were the ones doing your onboarding for you. They're coming after you as the employer. So like the buck stops with you, regardless of whether ADP is like, or not ADP, some other company is using software to like help you with this process, right? So that's number one. Like you're ultimately shouldering the liability yourself. So you need to know what they're doing, and you need to make sure that they're doing it right. And then you need to know, like, how do I get this information from you if I get audited? Because they're going to come audit you, and they're going to give you 3 business days. And unless you call me so I can get you more time, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you got to produce all this stuff in 3 days. And if you don't even know, like, how to get it from the company that's doing this stuff for you and what that process even entails, it's going to be problematic. So make sure if you're using a company to handle this stuff for you, that you are like really well apprised of, number one, how they do it, that they're doing it right. How do you get that information from them if and when you need it, etc. Additionally, there are a lot of like requirements under the law that there be certain types of like audit trails and things like that for the electronic I-9s. So these are things that you want to make sure that you discuss with the provider of your electronic I-9s, okay? Is that there's an audit trail that shows any alteration, who was doing the alteration, which computer it came from. It has to have a high degree of legibility and readability. It has to have an index of all the data. Like there's all these requirements that the law says. Now, yes, please.
Is this only for W-2 employees?
Yeah, we're going to get to that in a second, but the answer is yes, mostly. Let's just talk about it now. For those of you on the webinar, the question from the audience here was, does this only apply to W-2 employees? What do I do about my contractors, right? Is I guess the second part of that question. It's on a later slide, but let's talk about it now. Yes and no. Yes, if they're actually W-2s that are real W-2s and ought to be W-2s, and most W-2s are, right? Because you're not, as an employer, you're not going to W-2 someone that should be a 1099 usually, because then you have all the payroll taxes and stuff. You're not going to. So just assume yes for all your W-2s. Where it gets tricky is 1099s. Then you start, which gotta love South Florida. It is the hotbed of this like misclassification of employees as contractors. And it's because there's a lot of employers that don't want to pay payroll taxes, right? And all the other like obligations that you have. So they just start 1099ing people that should be W-2s. And so not only are you going to probably get in trouble with the Department of Labor, the Wage and Hour Division, the IRS, but you're also going to get in trouble with immigration. Because if it was someone that should have been a W-2, but was a 1099 improperly, in addition to your IRS and DOL problems, which can get quite intense on that type of topic, and this law firm, by the way, shameless plug for EPGD, they can help with that type of problem. Now you're going to have an I-9 problem, because you're not going to have an I-9 for that person that you should have had an I-9 for them. Okay? And a lot of times it's like information sharing between agencies too. And that is becoming a lot more common under this administration, the information sharing across agency, especially when it comes to things involving immigration. Because this administration has, they have that's their thing, so that's what they're going after. So like if it's anything to do with immigration and there's information sharing to be done there, like that's happening. So you really need to be careful that your 1099s are real 1099s and that they're properly classified as 1099s. We have lots of people in this room right now who can, CPAs and HR people and tax related people sitting right here in this room right now. I'm looking at you, that can help you understand if you're misclassifying your employees or not, your employees as contractors, okay? If they're actually real contractors and like they're properly classified as contractors, you don't need to do an I-9. However, if it's through like another company and then it's like a staffing relationship and you have a contract that there's like another company providing you, that's when you start getting into, okay, who's responsible for verifying that these workers are authorized? Okay, and you want to have that in writing. when you're working with like a staffing company, for one example. But when you're like using contractors and subcontractors and all of that, you want to make sure whose responsibility it is. Just because the person's a 1099, it's not like carte blanche to start employing unauthorized workers. That's the other thing I get all the time. Oh, well, I have this guy who works for me, but he started his own company. And so now he's just like a 1099 and I just like pay his company as a vendor, but it's all because he's unauthorized. And I'm just like, I mean, that's illegal on a variety of levels, but you know, you don't want to get involved in that. Because like, you know, once you have constructive knowledge of any of this stuff, you're on the hook. Okay, so like, the more you know, the worse it can get unless you're like properly following the rules and like getting educated on this stuff in a way that you're actually trying to protect your business and not trying to like put one under the rug. What's the expression? Like, yeah, and like pull a fast one on the government, right? And they've seen it all, by the way. Like you're not coming up with any trick that they haven't already seen. Trust me on that one, okay? You know, the new one is, we're going to talk about it in a second, but E-Verify, right? Okay, so now it's mandatory in Florida if you have 25 employees or more. Talk about that in a second. But, you know, the thing I'm getting now is the guy that calls me and says, well, what if once I reach 24 people, I just start another company? And then with that company, I do 24 people. And then I start another company. And with that company, I do 24 people. And I'm just like, oh my God. No, you know, like that. Okay. Like, it's obvious what you're doing. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is not a trick that you're gonna get away with as an employer. So, you know, don't think that you're coming up with some new scheme that no one's ever heard of before. If you're going to use an electronic retention system, these are your main points that you want to make sure it meets: searchability, security, reliability, readability. That's the test. It gets a lot more detailed than that, but those are like the main things you need to be thinking about. What I don't want you to do is do paper I-9s, scan them into whatever, Dropbox or wherever, and then just like shred them all. Don't do that, okay? I'm not saying that you can't scan them and maintain them electronically, but I would also keep the hard copy, because honestly, if your like retention system is not meeting the rules of the government, it's really not going to be good enough just on its own. Okay, it's not that you can't maintain them electronically, but I don't want that to be like your only way when it's like a DIY electronic system. Okay, most of the big companies, you know, you got to make sure, but most of them are doing it at least in a way that is compliant adjacent, even if it's not like 100% compliant.
Can I just ask?
Yes, tell me.
If you're scanning, you're still not required to keep the documents up. Is that true?
The person's documents or the actual form? If you're scanning, I would keep it, because unless your scanning system meets those tests,
Okay.
you know, I don't know. Like it makes me nervous if you only have the scans and you shred the originals. If it's only electronic, then there's no original to be had. But if you're doing it on paper and then you're just scanning everything and shredding, that I think is not going to be positive for you.
Back and have them redo the I-9?
No, you don't want to have, now, if you have an I-9 like missing, then you want to get it. The important thing, and we're going to talk about in a second, is like, don't backdate. Don't try to like create something that didn't exist. Like if you made a mistake, if you have an error, if you didn't do one when you should have, do it now. The thing to remember is better late than never in terms of doing it. Don't try to backdate it or make it look like you did it originally when you didn't, because they're going to know in a second. And the main way they're going to know is usually by the addition date on the document, something silly that people forget about. And it's like, oh, you marked that this was done in 2010 or something, but this document version wasn't even printed until 10 years after that. Oopsie, guess you faked it, right? Like stupid stuff like that.
Version.
I mean, that's it, but it's right there in I-9 Central on the USCIS website. you can pull the most recent version. And it will tell you too, like, this is the one you should be using, but we also will accept XYZ. But my opinion is when there is a new one, you want to start using the new one, because you always want to make sure that the new people and the new ones that you're doing are on the most up-to-date version. Okay, that's really important. Okay, so I think we talked about most of this. This is independent contractors. The other things we didn't mention is people not physically working in the USA. Okay, if you're not physically working in the USA, you don't need an I-9. Okay, so like a lot of like Andrea, who's out there helping me run this Zoom, thank you. She sits in Colombia. Like, I don't have an I-9 on her. She doesn't physically, she works for me, but she doesn't work in the US. Okay, so this is for people that are working like in the US for a US company. Okay, independent contractors, we already did that. Remote hires, we already did that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about internal audits. Internal audits is when you, as a business owner, use like April, or you use me, or you use someone, or you try to do it yourself if you're knowledgeable about this stuff, but you are actually kind of internally going through and doing audits of your documentation yourself to find errors, to, you know, make sure that you're doing things the right way. When we're hired for an audit, we not only go through and find all your errors, but then we help you correct them. We also train you on the right way to do it going forward. We can help like rewrite your policies. So those are all things that are usually involved in an internal audit. The main thing you want to remember about the internal audit is, number one, it's a great practice to start adopting, whether you're going to just do it yourself internally or whether you're going to have an attorney or an HR person do it. The reason I recommend using attorney is because it's privileged then. Okay, so like everything that's happening in the audit is attorney-client privileged. So, but you know, if that's not important to you, you can use other companies or even try to do it yourself. But you want to do them periodically. And if you have a lot of employees, you don't necessarily need to, every time you do an internal audit, do it for like everybody, right? You can just do it for like a selection. The thing you want to make sure you're not doing, though, is a discriminatory selection, right? Like, we're only going to audit the foreign nationals, or we're only going to audit the US citizens, or we're only going to audit the people that presented an EAD as their document. That's where you start to get into trouble with discrimination issues. Okay, so make sure that the way you're selecting it is not based on anything discriminatory. Okay, you're also going to identify a lot of common mistakes in your audit. And then you'll probably see that once you start seeing one mistake, you're going to see it over and over, because maybe whoever was doing this form, if it wasn't you, or maybe even you before you know, met me and started learning about this stuff more than you ever cared to know, you're going to see like, oh, I was doing that wrong, basically on every single form. You're going to start identifying problems that are repetitive and that are popping up on every single form. When you find things that you want to correct, be very transparent about the corrections, okay? So never white out, never try to erase, never try to like fabricate something that wasn't that way for like backdating it, things like that. You want to do things like a single strike through, then you write down the correction, and then you like initial and date it. So it's like very apparent what's going on there, and it's not like you're trying to hide anything. That's going to work out better for you in the event of an audit than the other way around, because they're going to figure out that you're trying to hide it, and that's going to be exponentially worse. Additionally, you don't need to write an explanation, but if it's something that you feel like it needs an explanation, go ahead and write an explanation and just put it with the I-9 in the folder with the I-9. So if you're like wanting to explain, like, why is this mistake, or why this correction, or what happened here, anytime you think that there's a little bit more info needed, and not just needed like if you get audited, but just to memorialize it and make sure that that is written down somewhere. that that's what happened. So I would suggest it. It's not required, but I would definitely suggest it. And it will help whoever's helping you through an audit if you get audited. It helps us, right? Because then we can see like why was this done this way, you know? And then it starts to make more sense once there's the details filled in. What else? Missing documents, doing things late, incomplete sections, that's all big landmines for errors. But also things that you can learn to and easily correct as well. So when you're doing these internal audits, you're really giving yourself an opportunity to correct stuff before you ever have to hand that stuff over to ICE. Yeah.
When you say late verification, that means you did it after 2 days, which is uncorrectable.
Uncorrectable, but better late than never.
No, but
Yeah.
let's assume you've done it, but
Yes, uncorrectable.
I typically count on 8 days, you know, for the day
Right.
of the day, it's 8 days after the day.
Right. You were right in saying it's
I can't change it,
uncorrectable.
right? I mean-
Can't change it. People try to just falsify the date. You might get away with it, you might not.
Might use the wrong pen and don't even realize.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And even though you're 8 days later, what's the fine for that?
We're going to get to that. Funny you ask. We're going to talk about fines in a second. Okay, so I already told you guys that stuff. See, I'm getting ahead of myself. I know these slides so well that I don't even. Okay, so best practices. Make sure you have timely completion, that your employees are completing section 1 on their first day of work, that the employer is filling out section 2 within the first 3 business days. Checking the document validity. These are just the best practices, the top 6 best practices. Check your document validity. Your employers have to verify the identity and the work authorization documents are genuine. Again, like I said, you're not expected to be a forensic investigator. However, you know, they expect you to use like a reasonable degree of knowledge on this stuff. Make sure you're retaining the forms correctly for your current employees and at least 3 years after termination for former employees. If you have to use E-Verify, make sure you're doing that correctly. We're going to get into E-Verify in a second. But you have to make sure that if you have to use E-Verify, that you're doing that also in a timely fashion. Make sure you are doing transparent mistakes, no erasing, no whiteout, and that you're making those corrections. And then last but definitely not least, make sure you're training the people that are actually responsible for doing this stuff on a day-to-day basis. You know, it's really important that those people are getting properly trained and continuously trained because this stuff keeps changing. Like during COVID, we had a bunch of new things. And then after COVID, there was new things undoing the COVID things, but then introducing other new things that came along after that. You know, so this stuff is like constantly in flux. So if you do have like an HR person or someone that's responsible for this stuff, make sure that the training is not just a one-time thing, but that it's a continuous learning process. Okay, so we already talked about a lot of this stuff. Annual internal audits. Something on that slide that I want to point out is another reason for doing the audit is also to show good faith if you do get audited. If you get like officially audited by the government and you can show that you have an internal audit process, you might get a mitigation on your fine under the standards that they have for mitigating fines, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Okay, a lot of that is duplicative. Don't put this stuff off because you could get audited tomorrow, right? And if you're like, oh, I never got around to that internal audit, I really should have done that, you know, too late. No time like the present, especially now under this administration, this stuff is ripe, right? So you could get a visit any day. And here's the kicker on that. You don't know what's instigating the visit. It could be a disgruntled employee. It could be a competitor. It could be a variety of things that you don't even know about that are happening. And then the next thing you know, there's an ICE officer in your company walking in the front door, and you're like, how did this happen, right? And it could have been something that you didn't even know was going on, like a disgruntled employee, current employee, disgruntled former employee. competitor, someone that has it out for you for whatever reason, okay? Like and it's all anonymous, right? So people do that. They do it. They make anonymous calls to the tip line, the hotline, and then the next thing you know, you're getting audited. So this is not something that I want you to put off. If I scare you at all today into doing this, then I did my job. And I'm not trying to scare you per se, but I am kind of trying to scare you a little bit, just enough so that you actually start paying attention to this stuff and taking action on it. You're going to pay me a lot more money if I have to defend you through an audit than if you want to do an internal audit. And if you're not paying me, you're paying someone, right? It's the government, you know. So there's money exchanging hands here that you would rather hold on to, I'm sure. So let's try to avoid that if we can. Okay, so if you do get audited, this hot mess comes straight from the government. I laugh every time I see this. I'm like, could they make this chart any more just like crazy, right? It looks like they just like vomited onto the page but this actually comes directly off ICE's website. So I love to show it because it makes me laugh. But the chaos I feel when I look at this is kind of like the feeling that you'll have as an employer if this starts to happen. But basically, if you get visited, it's going to start with a notice of inspection, which is basically an officer coming to your workplace and giving you basically like a subpoena for documents. Basically, it's like a notice that you're being inspected and the documents that they want you to turn over. You're going to have 3 days to turn it over. If you ask for more time, you can usually get it, but you have to actually ask for it. Then you're going to either have violations or not. Typically, you are going to have violations. Then it's a matter of like, are these just technical violations, or are they a little bit more substantive? And then also, like, is there unauthorized immigration issues here? When they are starting to look at fining you, this is the matrix that they use to either enhance your fine or mitigate your fine or just neutral. Okay, so based on the size of your business, if it's a small business, you can usually get a mitigation of at least 5%. If you have good faith, so one way of good faith is like, oh, we do internal audits, we have policies, we have this, we have that. That's another, we've done trainings, you know, that's a good way to show good faith. The seriousness of the issue, was it like a simple mistake on the form, or was it something more serious? Do you have unauthorized workers? That's gonna usually aggravate your fine. But if you don't, perhaps mitigate, right? Listen, these were all paperwork violations. There was no people that weren't authorized to work. We just messed up the documents, right? We just did the form wrong or whatever. Do you have a history of being an offender on this stuff? Yes or no? And then you can, the cumulative adjustment. Okay, this administration, we have to fight a little bit more to get mitigations. Okay, they're hanging out in the neutral or aggravating zone. But that doesn't mean we won't try. Again, that's part of the role of an attorney, is to be your advocate and to know how to argue this stuff in a way that hopefully will get the government to agree to mitigate your fine. And not only are we trying to mitigate your fine based on those, but then, like I mentioned earlier, we're also like looking for red flags, like, oh, they fined on a bunch of people that were outside of the retention period, or maybe they fined on the owner of the business. There's no I-9 for the owner. Well, the owner of the business is not required to I-9 themselves. So we usually get that one stricken, and then, you know, they do penalty reductions on ones that we can say, okay, these shouldn't have been even on this list, so let's eliminate those and decrease the fine by that amount. But then we also have that matrix where we can get more mitigations. When you are trying to negotiate one of these audits and one of these fines, not only do we use those tactics for mitigation and for, you know, striking things that shouldn't have ever been fined in the first place, but we also, oh my God, I just lost my train of thought. It don't come to me. Whatever I was about to say just like flew directly out of my head. So sorry about that. Okay, so let's talk about how much is this gonna cost, right? What's the damage here if I get audited and I start getting fined? This is like a general overview, and you can see the statistics that you were asking about here. In 2024, it was a historic low. 2025, we surged back up to 5,200 notices of inspection in 2025 alone. And as you can see, one of these slides I had the prior, maybe not, but it was like around, oh yeah, here, 6,500 in fiscal year 2019. 14.3 million in fines, penalties, and forfeitures assessed to US companies. Okay, so here's how it breaks down. For substantive and uncorrected technical violations, when you get audited, they give you a chance to correct technical things, okay? But then if you have uncorrected violations, that's when you get the fine on those. If they're just like technical things, okay? You can't correct like that you were knowingly hiring an unauthorized, like that stuff you can't correct, but some things you can correct. And if it is something you can correct, you might get less fine or maybe no fine on that. But if it's not, then you start getting into the fines. Minimum penalty is $288 per violation, up to $2,861 per violation. Typically, it's by form, okay, your penalty, and not by like each little thing. So if you have like more than one mistake, it's not going to be like $288 for each one. It's like by form. So that's helpful at least, right? Because some forms have multiple mistakes, right? Okay, for knowingly hiring an unauthorized worker, it's way higher, as you can see. We start at 716. If you go back, this one started at 288. So even your low point is way higher. And it can get all the way up to 28,000 per unauthorized worker if you're a repeat offender, especially. Okay. Not to mention that you might open yourself up to criminal liability, up to 6 months in jail, and fines of around 3,000 per worker. If there's a pattern and practice that they can prove that you had a pattern and practice of doing this, then it could become criminal. Typically, it stays civil, but it could become criminal. Document fraud, there's a different scheme here, starts at 590 and can go all the way up to 11,823 per document. This is things like helping someone basically falsify documents or knowing about it and not basically doing anything about it, or accepting a document that you know is false. Hi, Chris. Don't forget your luggage. That's a client of mine that just flew in and was flying out. So you definitely want to think about that, because it can get quite intense. Based on a 50% error rate or over 50% error rate, most employers are looking at around an $1,800 fine per form. And you can imagine that you're going to have lots of these, right? Because it's not only all the people that you have working for you now, but it's also all of the people that are inside of the retention period that you're usually going to get audited on. For a company that has a lot of turnover, this can get intense. Okay, so think about, like, I had a one location restaurant, South Beach, super high turnover. They were hiring people that were, students from other states and all kinds of crazy stuff. And one location restaurant with like 20 current employees at the time they got audited, their fine was like $280,000. Well, it can close down a business in a heartbeat. That's business ending. If you're a small or medium business, it's business ending fines. So, again, not trying to scare you, but this stuff can get intense really quickly. Even though you're like, oh, my company's small. Yeah, but like there's so many factors here that can amp those fines up. And especially if you're in a high turnover industry, it can get bad quickly. The substantive violations are considered to be the most serious. That's missing beyond knowingly hiring unauthorized people. But in terms of like paperwork violations, those are more serious than a technical violation. So they might get fined at a higher rate. That's like a missing attestation, a missing signature, like you didn't accept the proper documents. Technical are more like they didn't put their date of birth in there. You can still attempt to correct this stuff. All right, we need to start going quicker because we're going to run out of time. I already talked about criminal. I already talked about a lot of this. I'm just going to go through. This is basically just how it works. They come with the notice. We already talked about a lot of this. A lot of my slides are repetitive because I was combining a couple of different presentations to try and give you guys like a very comprehensive, in-depth, but that ended up making it so that a lot of this stuff is repetitive. Okay, let's talk quickly about this because I did mention it, but I didn't tell you actually how it worked. If you want to be able to do remote verification where you don't actually have to like hold the person's document or get like a trusted individual to be in the location of the remote employee inspecting their document, you can use post-COVID. During COVID, we had like other flexibilities that sunset. Those, you can't do it the way you did it during COVID anymore. Those procedures have been eliminated completely. So now it's starting in 2023. They started with this new thing. It's called the alternate procedure. I don't know why it doesn't have a better name, but that's the name. And basically, you can use it regardless of whether your workplace is operating completely remotely, but you have to be a qualified employer to be able to use it. So what is a qualified employer? Qualified employer is a participant in good standing with E-Verify. Don't use E-Verify, can't use the alternate procedure. Simple as that. So you might be like, oh, well, let's use E-Verify then, because then we can use the alternate procedure. In my opinion, as a professional working in this space, if you're not required by the law to use E-Verify, I don't recommend that you use it, okay? If you're required to use it by the law, then by all means, and one of the benefits is that you get to use the alternate procedure. Okay, this is when the employee is sending you through electronically the documents, you are looking at them, and then in real time, you are comparing what they scanned through to you on a video interaction with the person where they're holding the document up to the video. Okay, so then you're seeing them holding, here's my passport, and they're holding it up, and then you're like looking at the thing that they scanned through to you and making sure that it's the same. Okay, that's what the alternate procedure is in like a nutshell. But you're only allowed to do it if you're in good standing with E-Verify. If you're not required to use E-Verify, personally, I wouldn't do it. I would just suck it up, not use the alternate procedure, even though it's very convenient to be able to do that. Especially now where everyone's like hybrid and work from home and nobody's practically going to the office anymore. You know, it's very convenient. But if it means that you're going to have to use E-Verify when you wouldn't have to otherwise, I wouldn't. Because E-Verify then opens like a whole other can of requirements and things that you have to do and liabilities that you can have. And E-Verify, for those of you that don't know what E-Verify is, it's basically like a system, electronic system run by the government. It's run by Homeland Security in conjunction with the Social Security Administration, where they're basically doing like almost like a real-time I-9 electronically through their system. And it's spitting back out, this person is authorized or this person is not authorized. Okay, that's like a very general way to explain what E-Verify is. It doesn't substitute I-9. Okay, so it's in addition to I-9, which is another reason why I'm like, if you're not required to do it, why would you add like an extra thing? Because you have to do I-9. That's not optional. I-9 is not optional. Okay, so like why add E-Verify on top of that if you don't have to, in my opinion.
So if we have multiple locations, but the I-9 process is like handled through our HR in Miami, would we be like use E-Verify for someone in Atlanta? Or should we have someone on site in Atlanta verifying the documents?
So E-Verify is going to be different because that's going to be like based on whatever you collected in the I-9. So I think the question is like, how are you doing your I-9s? Are you using the alternate procedure because you're also using E-Verify? That would probably be easier for a company like that.
Yeah.
Or do you have someone who's like a trusted person that's going to do like the remote verification procedures in the other states?
So when you say trusted person, like what kind of qualifications? Can it just be like the manager or should it be like?
Anyone that's authorized in your company, and it doesn't have to even be someone in your company, right? Like if you have an employee that sits in another state, but you don't actually have, let's say, a full office in that state, like you can find a trusted individual, a notary, some other, maybe it's another attorney, but they're not like part of your firm, you know. I'm assuming that the business is a law firm. I'm in law firm brain. You know, another company that you are copacetic with, one of your lawyers as your company, like maybe you have a lawyer in that, but it could be anyone really. What I was talking about earlier was like, it shouldn't be someone that's like related to the employee. It needs to be someone that like you as the employer trust to act on your behalf.
And-
Okay. But in that regard, as long as you satisfy that, it could be anyone.
And as far as like re-verification would be the same. You need someone to like physically inspect the documents, not like scan an email.
Mm-mm. Unless you qualify for the alternate procedure, right? And then you can do it that way. So this is like why this is all weirdly interconnected. So like you can't just assume that I'm just going to use the alternate procedure. If you're not an E-Verify person, like, and you use the alternate procedure, even if you do it right, you don't qualify to use it in the first place. So all of that is going to be improper. And then it's going to be like you didn't even verify the documents at all because you did it improperly, right? So you've got to just be careful that you're like checking all the boxes, okay? So you have to not only be a participant in good standing with E-Verify, but you need to make sure that you're complying with all of E-Verify's requirements and that you're properly using E-Verify if you want to use the alternate procedure. I already told you how it works, so we can skip through this. You can't discriminate on how you use the alternate procedure, so make sure you do that. You want to use it consistently across the board if you're going to use it. You don't want to use it only for people that work remotely while you continue. No, you can do that. I'm sorry. You don't want to discriminate and use it indiscriminately, but you can use it only for people who work remotely and continue to do like a regular style where they just bring it to you for people who work in person. So you can do that, but you can't do it based on like discriminatory determinations. Okay, so like choosing based on their immigration status. Like, oh, well, we'll do the alternate procedure for the citizens, but we're going to make the foreign nationals present their stuff physically to us. That's not allowed. But if it's like all the hybrid or remote people we do alternate procedure for, and all the in-person people we do regular procedure, then that's cool. That's how it should properly be done. Okay, so let's skip through a little bit. We already talked about a lot of this stuff. It's optional. You don't have to use it. None of this does away with the regular way of inspecting documents in your hand. Okay, so what we started talking about was that E-Verify is a free online system. It's operated by DHS and SSA in conjunction, doesn't replace the I-9. They work together. And what I really want to talk about on E-Verify is, well, this is a good one. So let's cover this really quickly. The differences between the two, right? One is mandatory, one is voluntary for most employers. One doesn't require a social security number per se, one does. Can't use E-Verify without a social security number. Does not require a photo on a List B document, does require a photo on a List B document. So these are main differences. Must be used to re-verify, may not be used to re-verify. Can't use E-Verify to re-verify. That's done on the I-9. Also can't use E-Verify to pre-screen, right? So like, oh, I have this candidate. Let me run their stuff through E-Verify and see if they're legal before I extend them an offer. Can't do that. That's disallowed. Okay, that's an improper use of E-Verify as a screening tool. You also can't selectively choose who you run through E-Verify. And that's another reason why I'm like, if you don't have to use it, don't use it. Because once you sign up and you're like in it, you're an E-Verify employer, every single new person that you hire has to be run through E-Verify in addition to the I-9. You don't get to pick and choose. And I also had that consultation where the guy was like, well, what if we just put our US citizens through E-Verify? Because now we're required to, because of the state law in Florida that's requiring employers of a certain size to use E-Verify. They were beyond that size, but they knew that they had a lot of people that were not going to pass E-Verify successfully, if you know what I mean. Why don't we just run through the people that we know will pass? It's like, no, you can't do that. You're literally like, that's forbidden. So, and you can get into a lot of trouble with the federal government, which is never a good idea. Okay, they work together, like I already told you. This is like basically how it works. It's like pretty simple. You're just like entering the basic information that you got from the I-9 form and creating a case in E-Verify. E-Verify is going to spit out a result. It might spit out a result that says any of these things, employment authorized, that's perfect, that's what you want. That means you're good to go. It might have a referral to DHS for further verification. It might be continued. It might be final non-confirmation. That means this person is not authorized. It can be a tentative non-confirmation. That means that we think this is not good, but we're not 100% sure. And then when you get that, you have to actually tell the employee and ask them to correct it. So we got this tentative non-confirmation out of E-Verify. Please take 10 business days to correct this and come back to us so that we can fix it in the system. And that's when you're either going to get the work authorized or the non-confirmation. What I caution you against is not assuming if you get a tentative non-confirmation that the person's not authorized to work, because it could just be some other issue, right? Something that we see a lot of times is like women who change their name, right, when they get married. And maybe the databases are not matching up. But that doesn't mean that the person is unauthorized to work. Just means that, the Social Security maybe has her maiden name instead of her married name, and her other documents have her married name or something like that, right? Something correctable, and you need to give the employee the opportunity to do that. But a lot of times they can't correct it. That's going to be your indicator that there's an issue here and that you're probably going to get a final non-confirmation. In that case, you ought to terminate the employee, because that means that they're not authorized to work. And that's another reason why E-Verify is like kind of scary, right? Because it's like real-time auditing of all this stuff, and it's like happening in the moment, and it's also like in a government program. So there's like all trackers of all this stuff that's happening. Okay, quickly, before we talk about, and I want to spend the last 30 minutes talking about the other topic, which is like what to do if ICE shows up and for like a raid. That topic is scary, but it's a little bit less like technical than this. So we should be able to cover that in 30 minutes, but quickly, I just wanted to tell you guys that Florida now has mandatory E-Verify for employers that are 25 or larger. So if you are a Florida employer with 25 or more employees, then you are required as of July 1st, 2023 to use E-Verify. And so that is problematic, because if you aren't doing it when you're supposed to be now under Florida law, now not only can you get in trouble with the federal government, but you can also get in trouble with the state of Florida. And that can include things that are like fines, right, from the state, not the federal, which is the fines we were talking about before. These are state level fines, but can also include things like losing your license to operate, debarment, and other state consequences, losing tax incentives. There's a lot of like state level problems that you can get into if you don't do the mandatory E-Verify under the state. Yes.
There is a lot of employers that don't know anything about what you're talking
I know, that's why I do these sessions.
about.
Yes, I know what you're thinking. I'm trying to advance, but I don't know how to do
I go
it.
to restaurants. Do you think they know anything about E-Verify?
It depends on the restaurant. If they have HR people, hopefully.
No.
I know. That's why you need to refer them to me. This is a business. Like, I want these people to come to me and I'm going to charge them money, but I'm going to help them with this stuff, right? And I'm going to educate them and I'm going to tell them what to do, what not to do. That's the whole point of these sessions. I'm trying to give you guys valuable information, but let's not, mince words here. This is a 2-hour commercial for my services, right? Like, I'm trying not to be so blatantly like selling you something. I'm trying to educate you. But at the end of the day, like, this is my job. So I would love for you to take it, as a hint that if you do need this help, or you have a client that needs this help, or you have a friend or anyone that you know who to call, basically.
Necessary. I see every client I-9s that are wrong and every client
Yeah.
that have.
Yep.
I have not had one client.
Yep.
that has had a
That's right.
perfect balance of
No, I've never seen one that was like, wow, this is amazing. Never, ever, never. And it's usually like way worse than you think it's going to be too. You're like, oh my God, this is really bad. And unfortunately, like small and medium businesses are higher level of ignorance to this stuff and therefore higher level of mistakes. And that's not just, that's no poo-pooing on small and medium businesses. I mean, I'm a small and medium business, small business, and most of my clients are as well. I mean, love small and medium businesses. That they're where it's at, right? That's what this country was founded on. But it also usually means that there's no dedicated HR person. The owner of the business is doing like quadruple duty, wearing 85 different hats, doesn't have time to worry about this crap, is probably doing most of it wrong, if they're even doing it at all, right? And that's why it's so much more difficult with small and medium businesses, is because once you get into like a gigantic business, they usually have like a whole team of people that are, all they do is this stuff all day, every day. And so they still make mistakes, but it's going to be like, they're going to be way more educated on this stuff than your typical small or medium business. If you want to scan this really fast, this is where you can download the posters that you have to hang for E-Verify. I can go back to that if you want. I really want to get to the portion on the warrants and all that fun, scary stuff. Wow, I really made this presentation really long. Okay. I don't know how I thought I was going to get through 120 slides. That was a very optimistic on my part. Okay, so this is the next topic that we're going to close out this session with. Remember that beginning slide that was like the two things? It's either like a visit for I-9, which is all the stuff we just spent an hour and a half talking about. And I'm glad we spent the bulk of the time there, because that's much more likely like where you're going to have an issue, more so than like a raid, okay? But I do want you to get educated on this stuff because it could happen, and it's also important that you just know about it in case you have clients or people adjacent to you, even if it's not your business, that might suffer through something like this. Getting educated is the only thing you can do. There's literally nothing else you can do to prevent this or do anything about it. Okay, it's a surprise visit where they're coming in ready to arrest somebody in your business, and not only are they going to end up carting off that person and potentially other people, but also it's probably going to trigger an I-9 audit on your business. So good thing we spent an hour and a half talking about that. And also it's probably going to be disruptive to your operations, a bit of a PR nightmare, scary, just scary, traumatizing, and unexpected. And so like really the only thing you can do is just like learn about what your rights are in this situation and the things that you like should be doing if it happens. There's really nothing else you can do to prevent this. Okay. Usually also tipped off by some kind of tip or some kind of secret thing that you don't actually is even knowing is happening in the background, right? So, and all the more reason that it could kind of just come out of nowhere as a surprise. But basically, this is when ICE is going to come to your workplace looking to basically arrest somebody and search your premises. Okay, so if this if they come in and they're not presenting immediately a notice of inspection for I-9, but it's a more, aggressive raid style visit, the first thing you want to do is call your lawyer and tell them, our policy is to call our lawyer. I'm going to do that right now and call the lawyer. This also means that your people that are at the front desk need to know what to do, who to call, what the number is. Okay, so make sure you have a cheat sheet of a script. If this happens, say this. And also like your hot list of phone numbers. Here's all the people you need to call. The lawyer and also like the people in charge of the business, right? Because the person who's like responsible at the business is not going to be sitting at the front desk hanging out with reception all day, right? Unless they're like Jim and Pam on The Office or whatever. Like they're not hanging out at reception all day. So the reception needs to know, how do I get in contact with this person? And it might not be reception, depending on the type of business it is. It's whoever's the frontline person. Who's the first person that an officer is going to see when they walk in? Okay. Is it, oh my God.
No, you're good.
Okay. I was like, please don't tell me that it's been, they can't hear anything for the last 2 hours. That would be a disaster.
Will there be time at the end? to answer?
I hope so. We're speeding through this stuff.
Okay.
And can you get a couple of just like pictures, like just
Yeah,
general?
yeah.
Okay, perfect.
What type of lawyer?
Probably immigration, but I mean, probably, but I mean, whatever lawyer you got is better than no lawyer at all, right?
Yeah.
And if you call the lawyer quickly, they can either get on the phone with the officer or maybe even arrive at the location, if it's possible, right? If they're close enough and that's physically possible. But at the very least, you can get the lawyer on the phone, okay? Okay, so what can they do when they show up? They're free to enter any public space at the business, but they have to have a search warrant or your consent to enter any non-public spaces at the business. Okay, the question I'm getting every time is like, well, what if I put up a sign that says private? Does that mean that they can't go in there? Is it really private, or is it like you just put up this sign on like a piece of paper, but it's not really private and everyone's going in and out and there's no lock and whatever? Anything that you need like a key card or a fob or whatever to enter within is probably considered private. If it's really clearly marked and there's some kind of like security or barrier to entrance, that's likely a private area. If it's an area that pretty much anyone can enter with no one stopping them, then it's likely not a private area. Okay, I have a client that we're working through some of this stuff with, that the front door to the business is like locked and you have to get buzzed in. So they were like, oh, our whole business is private. And I was like, not really, because when I arrived, I buzzed, no one asked me anything, they just let you in. And then you're just like in the normal waiting room that's like a normal public waiting room. So I was like, I don't think that, oh, here's Eric Grodebaugh.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, that's my husband. This is his law firm.
Sorry, I was, what was I doing? I was at the Chamber of Commerce.
Yes, I already told them because they all asked me why you weren't here. So.
Get up on stage and speak, so that was fun.
It was fun. So Eric, I would love for you to tell everyone a little bit about EPGD, but if you don't mind waiting till the end, because we are cutting it close and we have like a lot of stuff to talk about still. You don't have to stay if you don't want, but you're welcome to. Okay, so the important thing is that to enter the non-public area, they need the warrant or your consent. Don't give consent. Again, we always joke about this, Eric and I. Not in this context, but in other contexts. Like, oh, I got nothing to hide, so whatever. I'm just gonna let you in because I'm good. Don't do that. Don't consent to things that you don't need to be consenting to. At the end of the day, they might go in anyway, but you want to get your objection, your non-consent on the record, recorded, okay? And when I say recorded, it's on another slide, but let's just talk about it now. What I want you to do in the event that this happens is have someone that's responsible at the company following around the officer and taking notes and hopefully videoing from their phone exactly what's happening. And it's not just going to be one officer. They usually are going to show up in probably threes or more. So you want to have multiple people and have like one person following each officer, writing down what they're doing and taking a video. Okay, so that's kind of, I skipped ahead a little bit, but the warrant we need to talk about, okay? Because there's two kinds of warrants, and you might have heard a little bit about this on the news because it was a story recently in the context of ICE officers entering people's homes with an administrative warrant and basically breaking down the door of a private residence and going into a private residence based on an administrative warrant, which is literally like, hi, unconstitutional. Like that, like it's bananas crazy. And like, so it was all over the news and people like me, my head was just like exploding, like watching these newscasts. And I was like, oh my God. And it reminded me a lot of this presentation because it was a different context, right? It was a private home entering, but it was like a similar argument, which is that the administrative warrant doesn't give the right. Now they're trying to argue that it does. I haven't heard it in the context of a business yet though, but that's what the story was, that the government, ICE, is making the argument that an administrative warrant is enough. An administrative warrant is not, okay, so there's two kinds of warrants. Let me backtrack, I'm sorry. Judicial warrant and administrative warrant. What's the difference? A judicial warrant is issued by a federal judge. It's signed by a federal judge. The government needs to go before a federal judge and be like, this is why we need a warrant. This is what the warrant is for. This is, you know, the reason we need a warrant. They have to show probable cause to, you know, be able to do these things. It's going to have specificity. What is the exact premises? What is the exact location? What are they actually looking for? Is there a specific person being named? You know, is there specific documents that they're looking for? And it's supposed to have all that specificity, and it's supposed to also talk about a specific time frame that it's supposed to happen, and it's done by a federal judge. Okay. An administrative warrant has none of that. It's literally like the chickens guarding the hen house. Is that the expression? It's like the fuck, whatever. It's like, right. But it kind of is like the chickens guarding the hen house because it's like the own agency like issuing a warrant for themselves. Like it's all internal. It's not like there's no like external body policing it like the federal judge. So it's literally just like the agency themselves being like, we're going to issue this warrant for ourselves. It's like weird. It's like it doesn't make any sense, right? And so you're going to be able to tell the difference when you look at it, because the judicial warrant's going to be signed by a federal judge and it's going to have all that specific information in it, and the administrative warrant is going to have like the seal of a DHS agency. Okay, it's going to be signed by like an immigration officer and not by a federal judge. Okay, the administrative warrant does not allow them to enter non-public areas unless you consent. If you consent, all bets are off. They could go anywhere they want because you told them it was okay. Okay, so even if you feel like I got nothing to hide, I'm all good, don't consent. That's not a good idea. Don't consent where you don't need to consent. This is what I just said. Sorry, I didn't have the slide up. This is literally what we just talked about, the difference between the administrative warrants and the judicial warrants. Okay, if they only arrive with an administrative warrant, you are entitled to refuse their entry into private spaces. Now, they might still go in. And what I want you to think about as an employer is I don't want you to get into even more trouble or even, I can't believe I'm saying this, but considering what we saw in Minneapolis, putting yourself in danger that you might be harmed, okay? So please don't try to physically prevent anything from happening. They want to go in there by force, they're going to go in. But what you need to do is understand that maybe they were doing it improperly and you need to record that objection, okay? And that's why you want to be recording everything. Okay, so we already talked about this. Great, I'm ahead of myself. Okay, so they're gonna serve the search warrant on whoever's basically there in the front. You can accept the warrant but not consent to the search. If you don't consent to the search, like I said, they're still gonna proceed, but at least you're preserving your challenge and your objection. So that's really important. If they demand that equipment be shut down or anything like that, they you know, can do that. They can also demand that no one leave the premises without permission. They can move your employees into a contained area for questioning. And some of them then might be questioning employees, and some of them might be executing a search warrant if there was documentation or anything else that they were looking to seize, to search and seize. Okay, so what is the questioning, what are your rights as an employer here? You definitely want to send a copy of the warrant to your attorney, so make sure you get a copy of it. You want to write down the names of the ICE officers, and you also want to write down the name of the U.S. attorney assigned to the case if that's evident on any of the documentation. You want to examine the search warrant and make sure that it's valid, because it should say, the time frame. It should define your premises with specificity and things like that. You definitely want to have one company representative taking notes and following them around, taking note of anything that's being searched and seized. Make sure you also ask for copies of anything that they're taking, especially if it's something important that you need to be able to operate your business. If they have a valid judicial warrant and they ask you to unlock private areas, then you need to comply with that as well. Let's see if I can get this to work. Make sure that you are asking for any necessary accommodations, especially if they're trying to take something that is critical to the operation of your business. But don't block or interfere the activities. Number one, I don't want you to be in harm's way. But number two, you might create more legal problems for yourself in the end if you're trying to forcibly interfere with what they're doing. So please don't do that. But, make note of what's happening, and you can try to prevent the access to the non-public areas if they don't present that judicial warrant. Again, if they're trying to force, then, let it go. It's better safe than sorry in that regard. Don't engage or debate if you don't have to. If it's anything that's privileged, make sure that they're trying to take. Make sure that you tell them that this is attorney-client privileged, and make sure that you notify your attorney as soon as possible. But you are probably not going to be able to prevent that from happening. So, you need to be careful with that. Eric, did you have a question?
I did, yeah.
Go ahead.
Are you allowed to say, hey, can I call my lawyer right now?
Yes, and you should do that first thing. I think we said it right before you walked in the door.
And if I can just add something, so I have, it's actually on my phone, I call them my Mexico rules. It's not because of Mexico, but it's basically whenever I'm traveling and you're interacting with police, you gotta stop thinking like an American. You gotta stop being like, hold on a second, let me rationalize. I was only going 32 miles an hour. Like, stop it. Stop thinking like you're gonna talk your way out of it. You're not talking your way out of it. Now, it also says in my Mexico rules to just bribe all the police. I would not recommend.
So don't follow Mexico rules. Thanks a lot, Eric, for bad advice.
No, but don't try to talk your way out of it.
But don't try to talk your way out of it. Don't fight in a way that is like physical. Okay, you can, but on the contrary, don't just be like a rollover. Okay, well, I guess I can't do anything. Like, you do have rights and you need to assert them, right? So that's why you need to be like recording and objecting and telling them that you are going to call your lawyer and, asking them, to see the warrant, to copy it, to make notes of anything that they're trying to seize. I mean, all of these things are things that you need to be doing. You definitely don't want to be giving any statements without having an attorney present, right? So that's really important. And you also want to be careful how you deal with your employees. So we're going to talk about that now, right? Like, it's not just you as a business owner, but this is now getting your employees involved, and potentially some of your employees may be even arrested, right? Because that might be why they're there in the first place. So you want to inform your employees that they may choose whether or not they want to speak to ICE. But you cannot direct them to refuse to speak, okay? So you tell them it's their decision. You have the right to remain silent type of deal. but you can't say, do not say anything. You must refuse to speak. Okay? There's a fine line there, but they're not the same thing. Okay? You don't want to hide employees. You don't want to assist them with, escaping through the back door when you see the guy in the front. Oh, here, go out that way. Run, you don't want to do that. You don't want to give any false or misleading information. You don't want to start shredding documents or like in the back, I always think of like in Goodfellas where she goes and starts flushing all the cocaine down the toilet when the cops are like there at the door, right? You don't want to be doing that, okay? At that point, your best bet is to not get yourself into any more trouble, okay? By breaking the law in other ways. Something to focus on as an employer. These are your people. Don't forget about their health and welfare. This stuff can take a long time. It can last for hours. If you know that there are people that need medication, if you know that there are people that have little kids that they're expected to go pick up, you want to make sure that you're communicating those concerns with the officers so that you're trying to take care of your people as much as possible. This also is a good reminder. If you don't have emergency information on your employees, make sure that you get all of their emergency contact information. One of the first things I have my people fill out is the list of, who's your emergency contact. Because if, God forbid, someone gets detained, you need to call that person's spouse or whoever their emergency contact is right away. Okay, because they need to know that very quickly. Your employees have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. They can ask if they're free to leave. If they are free to leave, they can leave. If they're not free to leave, they have the right to an attorney. Okay? Again, don't instruct them to refuse to speak to ICE, but they do have the right to remain silent and do not need to answer any other questions. They don't need to answer questions about their immigration status or how they entered the US. They can exercise the right to remain silent and to speak to an attorney. There's this like little trick that they do where they say, everyone that is a US citizen, go stand in that corner, and everyone who's a foreign national, go stand in that corner. They don't have to do that. That is speaking, even though they're not saying something out of their mouth. The action of doing that is basically as if they spoke, and because they have the right to remain silent, they don't have to fall for that trick. So they can stand in a third area. If they say stand in that area, stand in that area, they can go and stand in like area 3 that had no definition. Okay, and that's exercising their right to remain silent. So that's just a little tip there, because sometimes that's a trick. They can refuse to show their identity documents. They can refuse to disclose their country or nationality. What you need to understand is that they're going to get detained. I mean, this is not like, oh, I refuse, and so I'm going to go about my day. I mean, if they start refusing and the officers have reason to believe that that means that they are, let's just say, unauthorized, they're likely going to get detained. So just keep that in mind. They have those rights, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to get detained, okay? If they are detained or taken into custody, make sure that their families are immediately contacted, and also make sure if you owe them money that you pay them, even if that's like through the family member. Keep in mind, this can also trigger other agencies getting involved. We already talked about that a little bit. This is all just a review of what we already talked about. Okay, so what can you do? Basically what I told you in the beginning, which was like, there's not a lot you can do other than just get well informed. But one thing that you can do that's a little bit more proactive than just getting educated is create a crisis management response team and plan, right? Make sure you have all of your emergency contacts of your employees up to date. Make sure you have your hot numbers, your union reps, your attorneys, all the phone numbers that you need, that the frontline person at your office knows who to call and when and what to say and what not to say. Do an audit of your I-9. Everything we talked about for the first 90 minutes of this is leading up to this, right? If you get one of these visits, it's going to trigger that. Okay, so you might get just that visit that we talked about, the audit stuff, which is like the paperwork situation with all the fines. And that might stand alone. You might never get like one of these scary, aggressive visits. But if you get a raid style visit, it will also trigger an I-9. Then you're getting both. You're getting a 2-for-1 deal that you never wanted. And you're going to end up in that situation. So part of this response plan is also to do that internal audit and make sure that your I-9 and your E-Verify processes are up to date, that everything is copacetic there. Review your contracts. Make sure you know what happens if your work is delayed or something happens that you're unable now to comply with the terms of a contract. You might be breaching contracts based on this happening. And you want to look up and down the contract line on that. Make sure you have a plan on who's going to interact with the law enforcement officers and make sure that those people are well trained. Again, it shouldn't just be you. The officers usually come in multiples. So you want to have several people that kind of know what to do. You need to think about who's going to contact the legal team. Do we have all of our files set up for the terminated and current employees for I-9? Who's going to be the main point of contact? How are we going to address notifying family members? Who's going to have the ability to interact with ICE outside of our team, like which lawyers, who, and then make sure you have the proper representation documents in the immigration context. That's called a G-28. When I get a G-28, it basically signifies to the government that I'm the lawyer for that person. And then think about the public relations and communication issues, okay? Both internally and public facing, because this could create a bit of a public relations nightmare, but also like an internal, just chaotic, scary situation internally in your company, not just outward facing. Okay, this is all the same stuff. I think this is all just reviewing the same thing. Make sure that your subcontractors and your staffing agencies, thank you for coming. Tell Stuart I said hi. Make sure that they are compliant with immigration laws. We did touch on that in the first part of the presentation, but it bears reminders because you could be on the hook, and then something else that could happen is those companies can get a visit and then they finger you. Oh, well, that I work with that company. That actually happened to a client of mine. Okay, she called me in a huff because she said one of our clients that we provide employees to just got visited by ICE and they fingered us. So they're coming for us and we're freaking out. And so now we're doing a whole audit process. They haven't been visited yet, which is good because it's taking us quite a while to work through their mess. But I mean, that this is, these are things that happen that you need to be thinking about. You have this in your packet, so I'm not going to go over it. You have it there, and people online, you have this, but this is kind of just like a quick things to do, things not to do. This is like a cheat sheet that you can refer to quickly. You have a lot of other goodies in your packet that are like tips and tricks and top 10 mistakes and things like that, just to make it easier for you to kind of recall some of this information. Quickly before we wrap, this is what my firm does. We would love to help you with any or all of this. Everything we talked about today is this last column right here. But the other two are also work that we do. Visas, green cards, citizenships, any kind of affirmative applications. And then on your defensive employer compliance side, we have all the stuff we were speaking about today. If you want to stay up to date with the firm, you might already get our newsletter because you're here. And I don't know how you found out about this otherwise. So probably you're already on the newsletter. But if you're not sure, go ahead and scan that. That will take you to the subscribe for our newsletter. Here is my contact information. You have my business card in the folder. If you want it electronically, feel free to scan this. This will load it directly to your phone. And then last but not least, I did mention this at the beginning of the presentation, but if you had some value out of this today, and you enjoyed your free lunch, I'm sorry for the people online that you didn't get to eat, but I hope you still got some value out of this. I would really appreciate if you would consider a donation to the National Alopecia Areata Foundation. This is my cause. That's me. I've had this autoimmune disease for since I was 21. So I'm 48, almost 49. So over half of my life. And I found this organization and it saved me. I was really struggling. Rough, okay? Until I found the National Alopecia Areata Foundation and became an advocate, which is what I love to do. I love to be an advocate. I love to be an advocate for you, for your companies, for immigrants, but also for the patient community with alopecia areata. And so that's why I'm doing this and telling you to please, if you're so inclined, no obligation, obviously, but if you feel like you got any value, I would love a donation, even if it's a couple bucks. And that is it, guys. We did it, and we only went 2 minutes over. I skipped a lot of slides, so if you want to learn more about E-Verify or like a specific topic that I kind of went fast through, please let me know. In your folders and also online, you have a voucher for a free consultation. I usually charge at least $250, sometimes more, depending on if you want to come in person or whatever. This will get you a free consultation. The voucher's in there. You can use it for yourself, or you can pass it on to someone that you think might benefit from talking to me about this stuff. So that's there in your packet, and online you also had it in your electronic folder. So thank you so much. I would love to pass the mic really quickly before you leave to Eric to just tell you the very fast version of EPGD, because they've been gracious enough to sponsor our location and our lunch today. So if you could just give him your attention for like 2 minutes, that'd be awesome.
Thanks, Deirdre. And by the way, I'm also the lawyer for the National Alopecia Areata.
He is. He is. And they donate their legal services. They don't charge for that. And I really appreciate that from this firm.
We're business lawyers. So what's really cool is in Deirdre's other life, she works with a lot of foreign investors and entrepreneurs, and then US companies bringing foreign workers. She sponsored a couple of my employees. I had a lady from Canada. Right now we're going to be sponsoring somebody from Italy. But generally speaking, we do both sides of the coin. So we write the contracts and set up your companies and give advice. And then if you get into trouble or you get into a fight, you want to sue someone, or someone owes you money, or someone thinks you owe them money, we have the litigators. So we do both sides of the coin. We've been in this location for 8 years. This boardroom we just acquired when the next door neighbor finally moved out. So this is fresh.
And I'm already taking advantage. I didn't waste any time.
We have about 61 people here on site in this location. Happy to sponsor. And by the way, this is my wife.
For those of you listening online, I don't know if you can hear him since he doesn't have the mic. You can visit www.epgdlaw.com, and basically it will tell you everything that he's saying right now. This was our host venue for the in-person. So bye everyone online. You can disconnect.